to the She Leads podcast. I'm your host, Adrienne Garland, CEO and founder of She Leads Media, a global media company dedicated to the advancement of women leaders and entrepreneurs worldwide. I'm also an adjunct professor at NYU and Rice University, where I teach on the topic of entrepreneurship. I'm a mom to two wonderful young men and married to my best friend from college. Join me each week as I dive into raw conversations with remarkable, uncompromising, and inspirational women entrepreneurs and leaders. My hope is that these conversations and their advice will encourage you to put yourself out there and gain the visibility that you and all women deserve. We're all about stripping away the sugar-coated conversations and moving boldly in the direction of our magnificent dreams. For far too long, women have been conditioned to soften their words, modify their actions, and show up in the world to conform to outdated at best and harmful at worst cultural norms and ideals. Why? To keep those who are outside of the power structures from gaining power, prestige, wealth, and influence. This has prevented women from being recognized and respected as the powerful leaders that we truly are. The She Leads podcast is here to shine the light on all the incredible women, to encourage us to show up, speak up, and showcase the amazing work we do. Speak with confidence about the innovative and transformational thoughts that we have, and celebrate the positive impact that we are making in this world, both personally and professionally. So let's do this. Let's lead. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the She Leads podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by She Leads Live 2024. It's our 10th anniversary conference for women entrepreneurs and leaders, and it takes place in New York City on October 18th and 19th. So if you haven't gotten your ticket, be sure to go out and get it now because tickets are selling fast. Well, today is all about AI, all about pitching, and all about this incredible woman who is the guest on my show today. Her name is Heather Lawver, and she's the founder and CEO of Ceemo.ai. After helping underrepresented founders raise over $172 million in venture capital, she's automating data-backed brand, marketing, and pitch creation for startups. Heather's journey began when she finished high school at age 12, launched her first startup at 13, and led a landmark international boycott at 16. Heather, I've never met anybody that has those credentials, so I think that is amazing. And in addition to all of that, she has out-marketed a major Hollywood studio, setting legal precedent that helped shape copyright law for the internet age. And now, thanks to her uniquely broad skill set, Heather and her team are building the first AI logo generator and I guess pitch deck creator that allows founders to legally protect the brands they create with Ceemo. Welcome to the She Leads podcast, Heather.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited to speak to you. We were just chit-chatting a little bit before we recorded, and I was letting you know that at NYU, the entrepreneurship class that I teach, our final project is a pitch deck. And Ceemo is the facilitator of building, I guess, the brand's look and feel for pitch decks. So how did you come to develop this amazing solution? And what do you hope that it will help underrepresented founders achieve?
That's a great question and quite a story. So I like to think that I kind of tripped and fell into doing pitch decks. It's not exactly where I thought my career would go. But after finishing high school at such a young age and starting my own company, I've had a really long career so far already in entrepreneurship. But all of my training really and every venture I ran before was all based around design, creative writing, public speaking, and a little smidgen of television production. So I've seen how telling a better story and having the graphics and the brand and the presence to back it up can make the impossible probable. I've seen that power of that firsthand. But then in 2014, I was a founder in the very first cohort of a social impact incubator here in my hometown of DC called the Halcyon Incubator. And that was the very first time I had ever pitched to an investor. All of my ventures had been either nonprofit or bootstrapped. And that incubator was the first time that someone said to me, hey, you're really good at pitch decks. You should turn that into a company. And thought, yeah. And there I was thinking, I'm not qualified for that. Because I kept getting caught up on the thought that I had never raised venture capital. So who was I to tell someone else how to do that at that point? But I thought, okay, if you think I'm good at it, I'll help out. So instead, I started volunteering. I helped other people in my cohort. And then they asked me back almost every cohort after mine to help different founders with their decks.
Amazing.
And over and over again, I saw how underrepresented founders would get to that first fundraise, but be 10 steps behind when it came to the visual and verbal storytelling of their brand. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized everybody loves to focus on the fact that less than 5% of venture capital goes to women, BIPOC, LGBTQ+, and disabled founders. And I was seeing firsthand how that's a later symptom of an earlier problem. That if you're an underrepresented founder, you're far less likely to get a friends and family round, of which founders who do get that funding, they spend a good chunk on marketing experts to help them refine their understanding of their customer, figure out how to relate to them, how to create your first brand, and make all of that strategic to make sure that you're communicating as effectively as possible. If you don't get that early funding, you do it yourself. It takes up to 4 times as long. You never look quite as polished or market ready. So by the time you reach your first funding round, of course you look slower and less market ready by comparison. So you start out on day 1 way behind.
Wow. That is such an incredible insight, right? It's like you see the problem at its surface and you think that that's what the problem is. But the problem is a different problem altogether. I love how you wound that back and realized that that was what's going on. And so you created Ceemo to address that aspect of the problem. Let me just sort of also ask, this might be a little tangential, but so this solves the aspect of the problem of being more polished and having an incredible brand, so that when you do get to the farther stages, you're sort of competing on as much of a level playing field as there is. Okay.
Yeah.
But is there also an opportunity to somehow address the fact that friends and family round at that stage is difficult to raise? Is there some type of an alternative funding pipeline that could address that piece of it too? Because it almost seems like it's, I don't know what the word is, it's both problems.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And it's exactly why I built Ceemo the way I did, that we have pricing packages depending on where you are in the startup life cycle. Because even if you're really early on and you're not pitching investors yet, you still need a strategic brand and certain types of marketing materials to go out and get a bank loan.
Yes.
Or talk to grants,
Yep.
Talk to family offices, talk to nonprofits. You still need those foundational assets. And the more polished they are, the more you look like you belong in your market, the more you can stand shoulder to shoulder with those competitors, the easier it will be for those early funders to believe that you will get where you want to go. And the more we can help you tell that story, the higher your odds of getting that early funding. Now, I do think that there's a lot of room for growth in venture capital as a whole to fill that gap, but I can't solve all of those problems. So I built Ceemo to try and tackle what I could. That's my plan. Is I do have.
Yeah. I bet you that you actually could, especially graduating from high school at age 12.
Wow. I do have lots of dreams for later on, but yeah.
Good. Yeah. And you have plenty of time too. And this is incredible because it's funny. I had an earlier podcast interview today and another incredible woman. You both should actually know each other, but her name is Melissa Wallace, and she started a venture studio to address the problem of women not getting funding. And so she's really helping to facilitate the whole entire lifespan of starting up a business and getting it to exit and bringing in a whole bunch of different experts in order to help that happen. So I definitely think if you don't know her, that you do need to know her, because I'm sure that her venture studio could greatly benefit from Ceemo.
I'd love to talk to her. That sounds fabulous.
Yeah, it's so exciting once you start diving into this world and seeing all the different people that are trying to accomplish the same thing in so many different ways. And we need all of that. And we also need to really support one another. So I hope that even this platform, this She Leads podcast, can even be that place to just expose all of the amazing things that women are doing to get more funding and get funding into the hands of people that have been historically underrepresented. So I'm really excited about all of this. So I know that in my teaching and putting together a pitch deck, we walk through a whole bunch of different steps in order to get to a really great, it's never perfect, right? A really great pitch deck. Can you just talk a little bit, especially because our podcast is very focused on making sure that we're explaining things, because sometimes women entrepreneurs also, it's not that they don't understand it. It's just that sometimes people don't take the time to explain things. So can you talk about what some of the elements are of a really great pitch deck that gets investor attention and ultimately funding?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing I like to say, I think it speaks to a lot of mistakes that founders make when planning their slide deck. They think that the slides need to tell the story, and that's exactly backwards. I want you as the founder of your company to be the star. You need to be Beyoncé, and your slides are your backup singers. They're just there to make you look better, to highlight your most important statements, and serve to reinforce all attention on you. If you can do that with your slides, you're good. The second thing that most founders need to realize, we spend hours, days, weeks, even months perfecting that pitch deck and worrying about every single detail, as we should. But we forget that investors are going to spend on average less than 1.5 minutes on it.
No way.
And that huge, yes, that is the average, is 1.5 minutes per pitch deck.
Oh my gosh.
Because they look at thousands of them. So your job as a founder is to make your message as clear, simple, and exciting as possible in slides 1 and 2, because those are the only slides that you're at least guaranteed for them to look at.
Wow.
Yeah, which is really depressing when you first think about it. But there are ways to tackle that. I like to think of pitch decks. My apologies in advance to any investors in the audience. I like to think of pitch decks as children's books for grown-ups who love money, because to me, it's the same exact principles as a really beautiful children's books. You're going to take a really complex idea, simplify it so that anyone can understand it, and then visualize it so that they can understand it faster.
Ooh.
If you can do that with a pitch deck, you're golden.
This is good stuff.
Thanks. The last bit of advice I'll cover is, it's so common for founders to get lost. I almost think of it as you can't see the trees for the forest, because we eat, sleep, breathe, live our ventures, and we're in them each and every day, and it gets overwhelming. We can see the past and the future and everything, and it's just so beautiful because we can see every detail. That gets overwhelming.
Yes.
And your audience is going to end up in info overload. But it's so hard as a founder to step back and think, what do I say? What do I not? What do I leave out? And to me, the easiest way to think about that is to step back to my own experience and ask myself, what questions did I go over when I was deciding whether or not to pursue this idea? You asked yourself, what's the problem? Who has it? How many people have that problem out there in the world? What is unique about my solution? What is the market and competition like? And then why am I the person or the team that's special enough to solve this problem?
Yeah.
That's the narrative for a perfect pitch deck. And then you cap all that off. Thanks. You cap it all off with the ask of what you need to execute that exact plan.
This makes me feel so good because it does, because this is what I am constantly emphasizing in my classroom, right? And it even starts with what you said. What is the problem? I started teaching last night for the first night for my graduate and my undergraduate class for the semester. And I have people sort of brainstorm a lot of different things. What's the problem that you have personally? What's a larger problem in the world? And we try to balance, like, is this a problem for you and your cousin, I always say? Or is this a problem like world hunger, right? Like, we have to be careful about trying to bite off more than we can chew and trying to solve all the world's problems. So we have to find, that sweet spot almost. But the thing that I also push the students on a lot is, like, yes, that is definitely a problem, but you need to be more specific about why that's a problem and for whom. Because if you're like, oh yeah, homeowners, even if you're like homeowners in, New York, well, it could be a homeowner who has lived in the house for the last 60 years or someone that just moved in yesterday. And those two people are going to have very different problems, right?
Yep.
And that is something that I see people, students like, what do you mean that you're pushing me so hard? This is clearly a problem. And it's so hard as a founder that maybe has like a really exciting idea to start carving away all of the other junk or their vivid vision for the future, because you have to start in this like smaller space.
Yep, absolutely. It's one of my favorite guiding principles. I wish I could remember who said this, but one of my favorite bits of advice is fall in love with the problem, not the solution. Because so many founders get obsessive about their product, which, I mean, you should. Your product matters.
Yep.
But the first step is to become so obsessive about the problem that you understand it as deeply and vividly as your customer does. So that you know exactly how to talk to them, you know exactly each stage of the customer journey. And the reason a pitch deck needs to start with the problem is that's the emotional core. That's the hook that will capture the investor's attention. You have to think of it as an emotional roller coaster ride, and you need that big first plummet to carry the momentum all the way through the rest of the deck and get them to look past slide 2.
Yep.
But if you can't convey the visceral human emotion of the problem, the investor's not going to believe that your customer will care enough to part with their hard-earned money, no matter how fabulous your product is. They have to feel that problem.
Yes. 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 You are like singing my song. And it makes me so happy because it's so hard to convey to anybody really that like these are the critical components. And it is often the emotional part of it that investors get drawn into. In addition to the problem, it's also you as the founder too, right? There's that that magic element that founders have that sometimes investors will look past the problem, the pitch deck or whatever, and they say, but that person, they have that special something and they'll figure it out.
Yes, that's 100%. And that's the crux of the earliest phase of venture capital when you're talking about friends and family, angel, pre-seed, and seed, because you don't really have a ton of traction at those stages. You should have some, and there's a certain degree for every stage. But the core of it is, do I believe that this person will be dedicated enough, tough enough, unique enough to not fall apart at the first hurdle, to keep going, to keep figuring it out? Because 9 out of 10 startups fail. You need to convince them that you are that one special 1 out of 10 that's going to keep going and that has some unique insight that the rest of the market has missed. And that's one of my pet peeves personally about competition slides is that most founders think of competition slides as, oh, if I just show that I have more features, cool, that's it, that's done. Or if I'm just in the upper right of that 4-part quadrant, I've ticked the box and I'm done. And really that competition slide is about that specialness. It's about showing where is there a gap in the market? What is everyone else missing about solving this problem that you are special enough to have figured out? And that's the core of pitching at friends and family through Seed.
What I also like about everything that you're saying is this also applies. We talk about this a lot on the She Leads podcast and at the conferences and everything too. This also applies to pitching the media, the core of it, right? What do the readers want? What unique and differentiating factor can you bring to this story that you understand deeply what the publication is, what the journalist is trying to convey, what the greater issues at play are here, and how can you contribute in the way that is going to make that story pop for a lot of people. And so these principles are almost universal, and storytelling, that in and of itself it's a basic human it's something that we've done since the beginning of time, right? It's how we convey information. And so in addition to creating the framework and the branding so that, people can really focus on that story, how do you encourage these founders to be able to tell their story in this unique and compelling way?
Well, we're still an MVP, so the features on the software are not quite where they're going to get. So much of it right now is every pitch deck that we generate, every marketing material that we generate comes with a little mini textbook guide on every single slide, every one-pager, every social media content that walks you through each of these principles. And for pitch decks, for example, we talk about what do investors look for on this slide? What is the point of it? Here's a pitch deck story arc you could use to frame your story, to help founders think strategically about what's really important and how investors are going to process each given slide in a deck. But that's just the crawl version of what we're working toward at Ceemo. What I'm most excited about is next part of the phase we're working on is what I'm calling my AI pitch narrative generator, where right now, if you go to ChatGPT and you ask it to create a pitch deck, it's going to spit out bulleted list after bulleted list after bulleted list. It's boring because it's been trained on the sludge of the internet. Instead, we're incorporating every bad habit of every boring pitch deck you've ever seen. That's what it'll spit out, which isn't helpful.
No.
So instead, what we're focused on is how do we help founders see how to tell their story from new perspectives? Because it's so easy as a founder to get stuck in how you see it, how you tell it one way. And then it takes you a really long time to get out of that perspective and see it from the point of view of an investor or a media person or a customer. So our AI pitch narrative generator will help you do that by using ancient storytelling techniques that go all the way back to Aristotle, Freytag's pyramids, all sorts of things, to then reframe your story in a bunch of different ways to suit different stages of the startup life cycle, different audience types, etc.
Oh, I can't wait for that to come out. That sounds
Me too.
Like so much fun. Yeah. And I feel like that could also help, a different use for the same solution. I feel like that could help people in so many aspects of their lives. Like even if they, go to get a job on an interview, like we talk about in the media, like, oh my goodness, I can't wait for this feature to come out. I'm going to use that feature in many different ways. You might have something else on your hands that you'll have to, carve out and launch separately, because I do think that people struggle with that so much. It's because we are so close to our story that framing it in a different way feels like an impossible thought experiment. Like you could maybe do it for someone else, but it's so difficult to do it for yourself. And oftentimes, these founders, they are working by themselves. And it's hard to challenge yourself to think in a different way because you're the one that's thinking about how to think.
Yeah. And there are so many ways. Yeah. There are so many ways too that storytelling is so ingrained in how our brains are wired. Like the latest research on like Alzheimer's disease and our own sense of self is so much tied into narrative, that how we see who we are as individuals, how we perceive the world, involves the story threads of how we tie all of those disparate memories and core principles together. That once you come up with that track of how you tell narrative, it is like challenging your own identity to try and change that. And I think that's why pitch decks are so hard, is that not only are you trying to challenge your own sense of narrative structure, but then you have to step outside of that thing you are most passionate about, that you can see every detail of, both the past and the future, that it just gets overwhelming and you literally can't pick out, okay, this detail is important, but I can leave this one out. But then that detail is tied to this detail and that detail and this detail. And it becomes a giant spider's web that you don't know how to get out of. So, and I've never seen another pitch software address this issue before, but that's the core of why pitch decks are so hard.
This is such great insight. And I've never heard that before, how even, the storytelling, even if it's when it is about yourself, and that comes through in pitch decks, that you're challenging your very identity. And so our ego, tricky, manipulative, very good, does not want you to change your story because it's how you operate in the world and stay, quote unquote, safe. There's so many layers to this that go so far beyond business, right? And go into our psyches. Like, that's fascinating to me. I have literally never heard that or thought about it. Probably because my ego was getting in the way. Wow. This is so good. So another thing that sort of came up in my mind as we were talking about all of this, and this is something I think about a lot. I think about it from the perspective of starting a business, and I'm super focused on women, underrepresented, founders. And we teach and learn from companies that have been successful in the past. And so we think that is the way to, start and grow businesses and do all the things. And the statistics, right, and the problem shows that women and underrepresented founders are not achieving the same results as one might expect if they followed those patterns and those rules and principles and everything. So to me, like, there has to be a different way. Why are we, like, it's almost stupid for women to start businesses in the same way that men do, because we're setting ourselves up for failure because we don't operate in the same way that they do. And so I'm thinking about that, how that applies also to pitching and investment and everything. We're doing the equivalent of a story that I was just told, smoking the cigars and drinking the bourbon, because that's what men do, right? So with pitching, we are replicating what works for men. And so I wonder, just as another thought experiment, I wonder, is there a different way that maybe, women that become investors and then are investing in other women, maybe there's a different way to even pitch altogether? Have we thought about this?
Yes, we have. There are so many ways that change how investors respond, whether a man is pitching or a woman is pitching. There have been so many interesting studies about this. There was one study, I can't remember where it was done, where a man and a woman gave exactly the same pitch. And they gauged the investors' responses, literally word for word, slide for slide, exactly the same. Mm-hmm. Men got promotional questions. Oh, this opportunity is so exciting. How are you going to capitalize on this? How are you going to conquer the market? Women got preventative questions, negative questions. How could you possibly defend your moat against so many competitors? Wow, this market seems really complicated. So even the reaction was different, whether you're a man or a woman.
Oh my gosh.
And there are 1,000,001 ways that just the reaction alone plays against women and minorities.
Yeah.
But then there are also 1,000,001 subtle ways that men and women are trained differently in subconscious little ways by society in how we behave.
Yep.
For instance, my favorite thing to point out, and I still fall into this trap even though I've been training it for 10 years, men are far more likely to present their pitch with declarative, confident language. When we do X, when we get to X million in sales.
Oh my goodness.
Women will say the same thing, but say if we accomplish this, if we hit X million in sales.
Oh my
that
God.
Little subtle difference. And honestly, if is more logical. If makes more sense. If shows that I am being cautious and careful and deliberate in planning for the future. Because no one can say, yes, we're going to hit this amount at this time. It's all BS and we all know it. But men go in with the absolute confidence of certainty, and those little tiny things add up.
And you know what I would add to that? First of all, fascinating. And I would also add that language matters for the way that you then operate, right? So if I say, when I get to the top of the hill, my mind, my body is going to the top of the hill no matter what. If I say, like watching my words, when I say, if I make it to the top of the hill, that gives me the out that if I'm exhausted halfway up, that I'm going to turn around. And so it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yep, absolutely.
I'm definitely changing my words as, again, an experiment, because it's all a grand, this whole thing that we're living in is all a grand experiment, right? And I do believe that there is something, you speak it into existence and it happens. So with all of this too, I think that there is so much to learn from men and from success, but incorporate it into a way that makes us feel good. There's no reason why we can't say when we achieve this goal, that doesn't feel manly or, masculine. It's just a slight shift, but it puts your mind in a winning place. You're going to get there.
Yeah, to me, it's not so much about being masculine. The way I try to think of it every time I catch myself saying if or doubting is I'm reclaiming the confidence and agency that the patriarchy hasn't wanted women to have. That we're too scary, we're too powerful. So, okay, teach us to be submissive and meek and hesitant and quiet. And no, I'm done being meek, submissive, quiet, and hesitant. We can absolutely reclaim that. On the opposite side of that, I think it's ridiculous that so much of venture capital, for instance, okay, Steve Jobs is amazing and did amazing things. That means we all have to be as rude and awful and a miserable boss as he was. Right. Absolutely not.
No.
Because genius wasn't dependent on his poor managerial skills.
Right.
So we can 100% shake off the patriarchy, shake off the ways we've been trained to be quiet and not take up space, but still retain the parts of ourselves as women that make us powerful: empathy, kindness, nurturing, respectful, better bosses, to be totally stereotypical for a while. But yes. I do think it's important to recognize those ways that we've been trained to second guess ourselves and instead choose to be powerful.
Totally agree with you. Heather, I feel like I could go on and on with you, and I just want people to know how they can get in touch with you, how they can learn from you, how they can get involved and buy Ceemo and create incredible, pitch decks and all of that. But so please share with the She Leads audience how people can get in touch with you.
Absolutely. Thank you. You can head to Ceemo.ai. That's CEEMO.ai. You can check out their free trial. You can also follow me on LinkedIn. I'm Heather Lawver on LinkedIn. We're on Instagram and TikTok as @Ceemo.ai. I also want to say, if I could leave one last bit of advice.
Yes.
I want you to look for all of the other helpers that are out there. There are so many amazing organizations and women and BIPOC, LGBTQ+ and disabled groups that are trying to solve this same problem. So if you happen to be in San Diego in September, one of my favorite groups, the Stella Foundation, is hosting the Women's Venture Summit. And I am so proud that I am part of their women's pitch competition. I'm in the finals there. So if you happen to be in San Diego in September, come say hi. And I'll look forward to meeting you all in person.
I love that. Thank you so much. And I just became aware of the Stella Foundation during New York Tech Week a couple of months ago. And I'm just sort of blown away by the organization and how committed they are to just moving the world forward, at the most fundamental level. They're so incredible. I wish that I could be in San Diego in September. I thought that they were going to be in New York. So hopefully they'll come back to New York and do another conference, because I really would like to participate in that. But congratulations. That sounds so incredibly amazing. And just thank you so much for sharing all of that incredible wisdom on the She Leads podcast. I know all of our listeners are going to greatly benefit from hearing this conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. And if I can say one last thing real quick, if anyone's interested in Ceemo, we help to support all of our subscribers. So it's not just the software. You'll also get access to me, my team, other people in the Ceemo community, because we're all here to help lift each other up.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Heather.
Thank you, Adrienne. This was great.
This and all of our episodes are brought to you by the She Leads Podcast Network, the podcast network for women, by women. Thanks so much for listening to the She Leads podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support us, please share it with others, make a personalized post about what you took away on social media, and please leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. This helps our guests and our show to continue to gain visibility and traction. To learn more about how She Leads Media helps women to gain visibility, you can follow us on Instagram @SheLeadsMedia, or you can head on over to SheLeadsMedia.com. If you'd like to network with me and other amazing women, don't forget to join us each year for the She Leads Live conference. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.